The eggs cracked open one by one under a red sky, and the whole clan came to watch. On the world of Vaughn, this was the oldest and proudest day. Wings snapped in the cold air. Fire glowed deep in 100 dragon throats. The ash plains stretched out flat and grey in every direction, and the great stone circle at the center was where new life was tested and judged. The dragons of Vaughn were not gentle. They lived by one law, carried down from ancestors older than memory. The law was simple and hard. The strong belonged to the clan. The weak belonged to the wind. No one questioned it, because no one had ever needed to. Elder Vara stood at the edge of the circle. She was old, her scales dark as burnt iron, her eyes yellow and sharp. She had watched 1,000 hatchings, and she had never once broken the law. She watched now as the young ones tore free of their shells, shook the wet from their small wings, and lifted their heads to the light. One by one they passed the first test, the sight flight. A warrior would hold up a bright ember and move it through the air. Each hatchling was supposed to follow the ember with its eyes, then leap and snap at it. It proved the young could see, could aim, could hunt. Every hatchling did it. They stumbled, they hissed, but they followed the light. Except one. The last egg was small. When it broke, the hatchling inside was smaller still. Its scales were pale, almost silver, and it did not lift its head to the sky like the others. It turned its face this way and that, listening, but its eyes stayed strange and empty. When the warrior raised the ember and moved it slow through the air, the little hatchling did not follow it. It could not. It saw nothing at all. A low sound moved through the crowd, not anger, something worse. Pity, quickly buried, and then cold acceptance. The dragons knew what this meant before Elder Vara said a word. Vara stepped forward. She looked down at the blind hatchling for a long moment. Something old and tired moved behind her eyes, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Wind given," she said. The words fell like a stone dropped in still water. The clan turned away. That was the law. A blind dragon could not hunt, could not fly through storms, could not survive. To keep it was to weaken the whole clan. So the hatchling would be carried to the abandonment stone at the far edge of the plain and left there for the cold and the wind to take. No one would strike it. No one would feed it. It would simply be given back to the sky that had made a mistake. A young warrior lifted the tiny thing gently in his claws and carried it away from the circle. The hatching day went on. More eggs, more tests, more roars of pride. Life moved forward, as it always did, and the blind one was already forgotten. But far across the plain, someone was watching who did not forget. Daniel Reyes sat inside the small human outpost, his eye pressed to the long scope. His hands had gone still, his breath had gone shallow. He had spent 2 years on this cold world studying the dragons from a safe distance, writing careful notes, keeping the rules. Watch, but never touch. Learn, but never change. That was the human directive out here, and Daniel had always followed it. He watched the warrior set the small silver hatchling down on a flat grey rock, far from the clan. He watched the warrior turn and fly away without looking back. He watched the tiny thing sit there, alone, turning its blind face toward sounds that meant nothing to it, waiting for a mother that would never come. "They just left it," Daniel said, his voice cracked. "They just left it there to die." Behind him, Ro looked up from the engine panel. Ro was the outpost engineer, older than Daniel, calmer and far more careful. "That's their way," Ro said quietly. "We knew they did this. We've seen it in the records." "Records aren't the same as watching it happen." "Daniel," Ro's voice had a warning in it now. "You know the directive. We do not interfere. We do not touch them. We do not feed them. We do not save them. If we change one thing on this world, we could break something we don't even understand. That's the rule. That's the whole reason we're allowed to be here." Daniel didn't answer. He kept his eye on the scope. The wind was picking up now, cold and grey, throwing ash across the plain. The little hatchling shivered on the rock. It made a small sound, thin and high, a sound too quiet for any dragon to hear at that distance. But Daniel heard it in his mind. He had heard sounds like it before, from human Barbies, from anything small and alone and afraid. "It's going to freeze before morning," Daniel said. "Yes," Ro said, "it is, and it is not ours to save." Daniel stood up slowly. He looked at the door of the outpost, then at the thick cold coat hanging beside it, then back at the scope. His whole life had been built on being careful, on following the rules, on watching from a distance. He was a scientist. He was not supposed to feel like this. But he did. Daniel, Ro said, seeing his face. Don't. Daniel pulled the coat down off the hook. Somebody has to, he said. He opened the door and stepped out into the freezing wind. The plain stretched dark ahead of him, and the small shape on the far rock was almost lost in the gloom. He started walking, and as the last light died and the cold closed in, far off in the black, a pair of dragon eyes opened wide and began to glow, watching the strange little human cross the plain toward the one thing his whole world had thrown away. Warmth was the first thing the hatchling had ever known that did not hurt. It came slowly, wrapped around its cold body inside a soft cloth, deep inside a place that hummed and clicked with strange, gentle sounds. The hatchling did not know it had almost died on a rock in the wind. It only knew that now it was warm, and that a low, steady voice kept speaking near it, over and over, like a heartbeat made of words. That voice belonged to Daniel Reyes, and he had not slept in a full day. He had carried the hatchling back across the plain in the dark, half frozen himself, and pushed through the outpost door with the tiny thing pressed against his chest. Ro had said nothing for a long moment. Then Ro had sighed the sigh of someone who knows an argument is already lost, and had gone to fetch blankets and a heat lamp. Now it was morning, or what passed for morning under Vaughn's red sun, and the two humans stood looking down at the small silver creature curled inside a padded crate. It won't eat, Daniel said. He rubbed his tired eyes. I've tried everything, the nutrient paste, the warm broth, the ground meat from the stores. It smells it, it turns its head, and it won't take any of it. Ro crouched by the crate. Maybe it's too young. Maybe it needs its mother to feed it first, beak to beak, before it learns to eat on its own. Then we teach it another way. Ro gave him a look. We are already so far past the directive that I've stopped counting. You know that, right? We stole a dragon, an actual dragon. I know. When the Science Council finds out. Then they find out, Daniel said, but I'm not putting it back on that rock, so help me figure out how to keep it alive or don't, but I'm not stopping. Ro stood, looked at the small blind thing for a while, and then slowly nodded. All right, Ro said. All right, let's keep it alive. The eating problem solved itself in a way Daniel did not expect. He was tapping his finger against the side of the crate without thinking, a nervous habit, tap, tap, tap on the hard plastic. And the hatchling's head came up sharp and turned straight toward the sound, not toward the food, toward the tapping. Daniel went very still. He tapped again once near the food dish. The hatchling crawled toward the sound, found the dish with its face, and after a moment began to eat. It can't see, Daniel whispered, but it hears everything. It's using sound to find its way. He spent the next 3 days learning how the hatchling saw the world. It was not sight, but it was something. The little dragon made tiny clicks in its throat and turned its head, and Daniel slowly understood that it was listening to how those clicks bounced back. A wall bounced sound one way, an open door another. Daniel's hand, held out flat, made its own small shape in the returning sound. The hatchling was building a picture of the room out of echoes. Daniel had read about creatures on Earth that did this. Bats, certain whales in the deep dark ocean, but no one in all the human records had ever known a dragon could do it. The dragons themselves clearly did not know. They lived by their eyes, and when the eyes failed, they threw the young away, never guessing that another door might be open. You're not broken, Daniel said softly to the hatchling one night. Sitting beside the crate in the dim outpost, they just never bothered to find out what you could do. He started teaching it on purpose after that. He made clicks and taps and soft tones, and he moved around the room, and the hatchling learned to follow him by sound alone. It learned the shape of his voice. It learned to come when he called with a low 2-note hum. It grew a little, and its silver scales began to shine, and it stopped shivering. One evening it climbed clear out of the crate for the first time. It crossed the whole floor of the outpost by clicking and listening, avoiding the table leg, the chair, the coil of cable, and it found Daniel's boot and pressed its small head against it, and made a soft, happy sound. Daniel laughed and his eyes strung. "You need a name," he said. "I can't keep calling you it." He thought about the empty grey plain and the rock and the cold. And then he thought about where this small creature was meant to be, where every dragon belonged, high and free above the world. "Sky," he said. "I'm going to call you Sky, because that's where you're going to fly one day, no matter what they said." The hatchling could not understand the words, but it heard the warmth in them, and it pressed closer. Out on the plain, the dragons had not forgotten as easily as Daniel had hoped. Elder Vara had sent scouts to the abandonment stone, as was the custom, to confirm the wind had taken the wind given. But the stone was empty. There was no small body. There were no bones. Instead, there were strange marks in the ash, marks that no dragon claw would make, narrow marks, 2 feet walking upright, human marks leading away toward the outpost the humans thought no dragon cared about. A young warrior named Corin knelt by the tracks and stared at them for a long time. He was younger than the others and full of questions the elders did not like. He had watched the humans from a distance before, curious about the little metal den on the edge of clan land and the strange upright creatures who lived in it. He looked at the tracks. He looked at the empty stone where a dead hatchling should have been, and a thought came to him that made his fire burn cold. The wind had not taken the wind given, something else had. Corin spread his wings and rose into the red sky, turning toward the human outpost to see with his own eyes what the humans had dared to do. A shadow fell across the outpost windows, huge and sudden, and then the whole building shook as something heavy landed outside. Dust rained from the ceiling. The heat lamp swung on its cord. In the crate, Sky went stiff and pointed its blind face toward the door, clicking fast and afraid. Daniel was on his feet at once. Ro grabbed the edge of the console. Through the small window they could see it now, a full-grown dragon standing in the ash outside, wings half spread, scales dark and gleaming, eyes fixed on the outpost door. It was young for a dragon but still enormous, twice the length of the outpost itself, and its breath came out in slow curls of smoke. "That's Corin," Ro said quietly, pulling up the record. They had names for a few of the dragons they had watched over the years. One of the younger warriors, curious one, he's followed our patrols before. The dragon opened its mouth, and a voice came out, deep and rough, shaped strangely around human words it had clearly learned only by listening from far away. "Human," the word rolled like thunder. "You have taken something, something of ours, bring it out." Daniel's heart was slamming. He had never stood this close to a living dragon. Nothing on his data screens had prepared him for the size of it, the heat that came off its body, the raw weight of its stare. But behind him, in the crate, Sky made a small frightened sound, and something in Daniel went hard and steady. He opened the door and stepped outside into the cold. "Daniel," Ro hissed. "Daniel, no." But he was already out, small and thin in front of the great dragon, the wind pulling at his coat. He made himself look up into those huge yellow eyes. "I took it," Daniel said. His voice shook, but he said it. "You left it to die. I took it, and I'm not giving it back so you can leave it on a rock again." Corin's head lowered until it was level with Daniel, close enough that the human could feel the heat of its breath. "The wind given belongs to the wind," the dragon growled. "That is the law. You do not understand our ways, human. That creature was born broken, blind, it cannot see. A blind dragon cannot survive. To keep it is to spread weakness through the clan. That is why we give it back." "It's not broken," Daniel said. Corin's eyes narrowed. "It is blind." "Come and see," Daniel said. And then, before his courage could fail, he turned his back on the dragon and walked into the outpost, leaving the door open behind him. There was a long, terrible pause. Then, slowly, Corin lowered his body and pushed his great head and neck through the wide doorway, filling the room with smoke and heat, his eyes searching the dim space. Daniel crouched by the crate. "Sky," he said softly, "come here, come to me." And he made the low 2-note hum he had taught the hatchling. Sky climbed out of the crate. The tiny silver dragon could not see the enormous warrior filling the room. It clicked in its throat, listening to the echoes, and it crossed the whole floor without stumbling once. It moved around the table leg. It moved around the fallen chair. It followed the sound of Daniel's voice straight to his outstretched hand, and it pressed its small head into his palm, blind and calm, and completely sure of where it was. Corin stared. "It cannot see," the great dragon said slowly, "but it moves. It knows where the walls are. It knows where you are. How?" "Sound," Daniel said. "It makes little clicks, and it listens to how they come back. It builds a picture of the world out of echoes. Its eyes don't work, so it learned to see another way. Watch." He picked up a small metal cup and set it down in a new place on the floor, well away from Sky. Then he tapped the floor once beside it. Sky's head turned. The hatchling clicked, listened, and crawled straight to the cup, finding it in the dark as easily as if it were glowing. The huge dragon drew its head back. Something had changed in its eyes. The scorn was gone, replaced by something Daniel had not expected to see on a dragon's face at all. "Wonder." "No dragon has ever survived blindness," Corin said. His voice had dropped low. "The elders say it is impossible. They say a blind hatchling is already dead, only its heart does not know it yet. But this one lives, and it moves, and it is not lost." He looked at Daniel. "You did this, you, a human, in a few days. You saw a way we never looked for." "Anyone could have," Daniel said. "You just never tried." Corin was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled his head out of the doorway and stood in the ash, and something troubled moved through his whole body. "I must tell the elders," he said. "Wait," Daniel said, following him out. "If you tell them, what will they do?" Corin did not answer right away, and that silence told Daniel everything. The warrior lifted into the sky and flew back across the plain toward the clan, and Daniel stood watching him go with a cold weight growing in his stomach. He was right to worry. When Corin landed among the elders and told them what he had seen, Elder Vara listened in silence, and then she rose up tall and terrible, and her voice cracked like breaking stone. "You lie," she said. "A blind dragon cannot see. The law is the law. The humans have taken the wind given and twisted it into a mockery of our young. This is not a miracle. This is an abomination, kept alive against nature by soft creatures who do not understand what they touch." Corin lowered his head. "Elder, I saw it with my own eyes." "Then your eyes are as broken as the hatchlings," Vara snapped. "The wind given was meant to die. If the humans will not let it die, then we will end it ourselves, and we will remind these creatures that this is our world and our law." She turned to the gathered warriors, and her old eyes burned. "At first light, we go to the human den, we take back the abomination, and we destroy it." Back at the outpost, Daniel had no way to hear those words, but as the red sun sank, he began sealing the doors, checking the walls, gathering what few things might help them hold. Ro watched him grimly. "You know we can't fight dragons," Ro said. "If they come, we can't win." "I know," Daniel said quietly, looking down at Sky, who had fallen asleep against his boot. "But I'm not giving up either." He did not know how soon they would come. But somewhere out on the dark plain, wings were already beginning to gather, and the sky itself was starting to fill with the shapes of dragons. First light on Vaughn came the color of blood, and it came with wings, dozens of them. They filled the red dawn above the human outpost, circling, their shadows sweeping over the ash again and again, until it seemed the whole sky had turned to dragons. At the front of them all flew Elder Vara, old and black and terrible, and where she led, the warriors followed. Inside the outpost, Daniel felt the beat of those wings before he heard them, a deep drumming in the air. He looked at Ro. Ro looked back and said nothing because there was nothing left to say. They both knew what was coming, and they both knew they could not stop it. Sky knew too. The little dragon was awake and pressed hard against Daniel's leg, clicking fast and high, its whole small body shaking. It could not see the sky full of its own kind, but it could hear them. It could feel the fear pouring off the two humans, and it understood, in the way small frightened things always understand, that something very bad was near. The first dragon struck the outpost, and the world came apart. Fire roared across the roof. Metal screamed and buckled. A wall tore open, and cold air and smoke poured in, and through the gap Daniel could see the huge shapes landing all around them, ringing the outpost in scale and flame. He grabbed Sky and pulled the hatchling close, and backed against the last standing wall as the ceiling groaned overhead. Then the fire stopped, and a great dark head pushed through the broken wall. Elder Vara. Her yellow eyes found Daniel, then dropped to the small silver hatchling in his arms, and her lip curled back from her teeth. "Give it to me, human," she said. Her voice was ancient and cold. "You do not understand what you have done. This creature is not a miracle. It is a wound in the law that has kept my clan alive since before your kind crawled out of the mud. Give it to me, and I may let you live." Daniel did not let go. He stood there in the wreckage of everything he had built, a small soft creature holding a smaller one, facing a dragon older than his whole civilization, and he lifted his chin. "No," he said. "You would die for it," Vara said, "for a broken thing your own science would have thrown away." "You keep saying it's broken." Daniel's voice was shaking, but it carried. "You've said it 100 times because it's easier than looking. You threw this hatchling away because its eyes don't work, but you never once asked what else it could do. You never asked if there was another way to see. You just followed the law because the law is easy and looking is hard." He took a breath. "Strength isn't the same as worth," he said. "You think the weak belong to the wind, but this little one is stronger than you because you would have let it die and it never gave up living. That's the strength you never taught. That's the thing your law can't see." Vara's eyes blazed, and she drew back her head, and fire gathered deep in her throat. And sky moved. The little dragon must have heard it, the deep breath, the gathering fire, the ancient enemy readying to strike. It could not see Vara, but it heard everything, and instead of running from the sound, it climbed. It scrambled up out of Daniel's arms and planted itself in front of him, small and silver and blind, spreading its tiny useless wings as wide as they would go, putting its own body between the human and the flame. It clicked and clicked, reading the enormous shape of the elder in front of it, and it made a sound that was not fear. It was a challenge, a tiny, impossible challenge thrown up at a dragon 100 times its size to protect the one creature that had ever been kind to it. Vara froze. The fire died in her throat, unspent. For a long, long moment, the old dragon simply stared at the blind hatchling standing guard over the human. She had abandoned it herself. She had marked it wind-given with her own voice. She had come to end it. And here it was, this creature that could not see, standing in front of a flame it could not see, ready to die for something the law said it should never have known. "It knows I am here," Vara said slowly. Her voice had changed. The cold was cracking. "It cannot see me, yet it stands. It reads me through the air. It moves like it was born knowing." She lowered her great head until she was eye to blind eye with the little silver dragon, and her breath stirred its small wings. How does the weak stand strong?" Behind her, in the ring of warriors, one broke away. Corin landed hard between the elder and the outpost, and he lowered his head, but not in surrender. "Elder Vara," he said, "I will not strike it. I told you what I saw and you called my eyes broken. But look with your own. That hatchling just tried to shield a human from your fire. When has any of our young shown such heart? We throw them away for their eyes, and we never see their hearts at all." The other warriors shifted. The fire that had filled them began to cool. They had come to destroy a broken thing, and instead they had watched a broken thing become the bravest creature on the plain. Vara was silent for a long time. The wind moaned across the ruined outpost. The blind hatchling stood its ground, wings spread, unmoving, guarding its human. At last the old dragon folded her wings. She lifted her head and looked around at her warriors, at Corin, at the wreckage, at the small silver shape that had refused to die. And something that had been fixed in place for 1,000 years began, slowly, to move. "Hold," Vara said. Her voice was quieter than Daniel had ever imagined a dragon's voice could be. "No one strikes, no one burns." She turned back to Daniel, and the human braced himself, unsure what was coming. But the elder did not attack. Instead, she lowered her ancient head, almost to the ground. In a gesture Daniel did not have the knowledge to read, but understood all the same. And she asked the human a question that no dragon had ever asked another creature in all the long, proud history of Vaughn. "Teach us," Vara said. "Teach us to see the way it sees. Nobody in the clan had ever seen an elder lower her head to another creature, and word of it spread across the ash plains faster than any fire. By the time the red sun had crossed the sky, dragons were coming from every corner of the clan land to see the impossible thing with their own eyes. A full-grown warrior learning at the feet of a blind hatchling and a small soft human. It did not happen quickly. Old belief is like old stone, and it does not crack all at once. Daniel began the way he always began, by watching. He watched how Sky moved, and he taught the dragons to watch too. He showed them the little clicks in Sky's throat, and how the sound went out and came back, and how Sky read the answer. He explained it in the simplest way he could, and Corin translated the human words into the low rumble the dragons understood. The sound leaves the throat, Daniel said, standing on a flat rock so the great creatures could see him. It travels through the air. It touches a wall, a stone, a body, and it bounces. It comes back changed. And if you learn to listen to how it comes back, you can build a picture of the world without ever using your eyes. The dragons did not believe him, not at first. Sight was everything to them. They had always trusted their eyes above all things, and the idea that sound could do the same work seemed like a child's story. So Daniel did what he did best. He proved it. He had them close their eyes, all of them, the whole gathered crowd of warriors, and he had them try to move through a field of stones he had set out. With their eyes shut and no other sense trained, they stumbled. They knocked the stones. They lost their way. They grew angry and ashamed. Then he brought out Sky. The little silver dragon, blind from birth, walked the same field of stones with its eyes that had never opened, clicking softly, and it did not touch a single one. It wove between them like water, sure and calm, and when it reached the far end, it turned its face back toward the crowd as if to say, "This is all it is. This is what you never learned." The dragons went very quiet. That was the day it truly began. That was the day the old law started to die. Corin was the first to learn. He was young and full of questions, and he took to it with a hunger that surprised even himself. He learned to make the clicks, low and rough at first, and to listen for the echo. It took him days. He failed and failed. But one evening, blindfolded on the plain, he walked a full circle of stones without touching one, and he threw back his head and roared with a joy that shook the air, because for the first time in his life he had seen with something other than his eyes. After Corin came others, young dragons mostly curious and willing, then older ones, and slowly as they learned, they began to understand something that Daniel had known from the start, but had been careful not to say too loudly. This did not only help the blind. A dragon who could see with sound could hunt in the black of night. A dragon who could see with sound could fly through the great ash storms that rolled across Vaughn and blinded every eye. A dragon who could see with sound could find its way deep in the caves where no light ever reached. The thing they had thrown their broken young away for was not a weakness at all. It was a gift, and it had been sitting in their own throats, unused, for 1,000 years. Sky became the teacher no one had expected. The blind hatchling, once left to die on a rock, now led great warriors through the dark, guiding creatures 10 times its size through storms and caves, showing them the world it had always lived in. The young ones followed it everywhere. They loved it, this small silver thing that had beaten the law and lived. And Daniel would watch it lead them out into the ash and feel something in his chest that was too big for words. Elder Vara struggled the hardest of all. She was old, and the law was written deep in her, deeper than in any of the others. She had spoken the words wind given over more hatchlings than she could count. She had watched more small bodies carried to the stone than she wanted to remember. Every one of them, she now understood, might have lived. Every one might have flown. That was a weight almost too heavy to carry, and Daniel saw it bend her. "I sent them to the wind," she said to him one night, the two of them alone under the stars, human and dragon, small and vast. All of them, not just the blind ones, any hatchling that did not fit the law. I called it strength. I called it protecting the clan. And I was wrong, human. For 1,000 years I was wrong. "You didn't know," Daniel said quietly. "None of you knew there was another way. That does not bring them back." "No," Daniel agreed. "It doesn't, but it saves the next ones, and that's the only thing any of us can ever really do." Vara was silent for a long time, looking up at the cold, bright stars. Then she said, There are others, wind-given, left in the last seasons, some of them perhaps still alive on the far stones, blind ones, small ones, ones the law threw away. Daniel turned to her, then let's go get them. And they did, quietly at first, then openly. The dragons began bringing back the ones they had abandoned. Corin flew to the far stones and returned with hatchlings that should have been dead, thin and cold and afraid, and Daniel and Ro and Sky fed them and warmed them and taught them to see with sound. The wind-given were given a second chance, one by one, and the outpost that had nearly burned became the strangest school in the whole galaxy, where dragons learned from a human and a human learned from dragons, and a blind hatchling led them all. For a while, it was something close to peace. But the clan on the Ash Plain was not the only clan on Vaughn. And word of what was happening, of a human changing the oldest law, of abominations being carried back from the stones and welcomed home, spread beyond the plain to other clans, older and prouder and colder still. One grey morning, the sky darkened again, but not with the wings of Vara's warriors. This was a greater host, dragons from many clans together, the High Council of Vaughn itself, come to see what madness had taken the Ashplain clan. They landed in a ring around the outpost, vast and silent, and their oldest members looked down at the human, and the elder who bowed to him, and the blind hatchling that led warriors through storms, and they did not see a miracle. They saw a betrayal of everything their ancestors had ever believed, and they had come to put it right. The oldest dragon on Vaughn had scales the color of old bone and eyes gone pale with age, and when it spoke, the whole council fell silent to listen. It stood at the head of the great ring, and it looked down at the small human standing in the middle of the ash, and its voice was slow and heavy and utterly without warmth. For 1,000 generations, the old dragon said, our law has been the law, the strong live, the weak return to the wind. It has kept our kind alive through storms and famine and war, and now we are told that one clan has thrown this law away, that they carry the wind given back from the stones, that they bow to a soft creature from another world, that they let a blind thing lead warriors like a mother leads young. Its pale eyes swept the gathered crowd. This is not mercy, this is rot. And rot must be cut away before it spreads. It turned those cold eyes on Daniel. Human, you will leave this world, and the broken ones you have gathered will be returned to the stones as the law commands. If you refuse, we will end them here and you with them. The council has spoken. Daniel's mouth had gone dry. Around the ring, the other clan dragons shifted and growled, and he could feel the weight of their ancient certainty pressing down on him like a mountain. He was one small human at the center of the oldest power on the planet, and every part of him wanted to run. But he did not run. You came a long way, Daniel said, and he made his voice carry, to throw away children you've never even looked at. The old dragon's head drew back. That's all your law is, Daniel went on. Not looking, you decided 1,000 years ago that a blind hatchling was worthless, and you never once checked if you were right. I checked. I picked one up off a rock and I checked, and I found out the thing you were throwing away could do something none of you can do. He pointed out toward the plain, where the wind was rising and the sky at the horizon had gone dark and thick. There's an ash storm coming, you all see it. In a few minutes it'll roll across this whole plain and blind every eye here. Every one of you will be helpless in it, every one of you except one. He looked toward the outpost, and he called out, low and clear, the two-note hum he had used since the very first day. And Sky came. The silver dragon was bigger now, grown strong and sleek, no longer a hatchling but a young dragon in its full shape, and it crossed the ash toward Daniel with the sure, calm step of a creature that had never once needed its eyes. The council watched it come. Some of them still curled their lips at the blind thing. Others only stared. The storm hit. It came all at once, a wall of grey ash howling across the plain, and it swallowed the sun and swallowed the sky and swallowed every dragon in the ring. The great council, the proudest and oldest dragons on the planet, were struck blind in an instant. They flinched and stumbled and pressed low to the ground, their sight torn away, their strength useless, roaring in confusion as the world turned to choking grey. And into that storm, Sky flew. The young blind dragon spread its wings and rose into the very heart of the ash, the place no seeing dragon could go, and it did not falter for a moment. It clicked and listened and read the storm the way it had always read the dark. It wove between the blinded elders, over them, around them, sure and swift and utterly at home. The storm that had brought the mightiest dragons on Vaughn to their knees was nothing to it. It was just another kind of darkness, and darkness was where it had lived its whole life. Through the roaring grey, the council could not see sky, but they could hear it. They could hear the strong, steady beat of its wings above them, calm and unafraid, flying where none of them could follow, and the sound of it went into them deeper than any words Daniel had spoken. When the storm passed and the sun broke through again, Sky landed softly in the center of the ring, before the oldest dragon on Vaughn, and folded its wings, calm and unhurt, while the great council still shook the ash from their eyes. No one spoke. The old bone-colored dragon stared at the blind creature that had flown through the storm that had defeated it. For a long, long moment, the pale ancient eyes and the blind silver ones faced each other. And then, slowly, the oldest dragon on the planet did something it had not done in longer than any living dragon could remember. It lowered its head. "The blind one flies," it said very quietly, "where the strong cannot." Elder Vara stepped forward then, into the center of the ring, and she lifted her old dark head and spoke so all the clans could hear. "We were wrong," she said. "For 1,000 years we measured worth by the body, by the eyes, by the wings, by the strength of the claw, and we threw away our own young when the body was not perfect. But a human came to this world and picked up the one thing we had discarded, and he showed us what we could never see. Worth is not in the body, it is in the heart. It is in the will to live when the world says die. From this day the wind given belong to no wind. They belong to us. They are ours, and they are wanted, every one." She turned to Daniel and to Sky beside him, and the whole gathered host of dragons, clan after clan, lowered their heads, and the old law of Vaughn died there on the ash plain and was not mourned. The seasons turned after that, as seasons do. Outpost was rebuilt, bigger now, and it was never empty. Dragons came and went from it freely, learning to see with sound, bringing their young, and no hatchling on Vaughn was ever again carried to a stone and left for the cold. Corin became a leader among the clans, teaching the old skill to any who would learn. And Sky, the blind one, the thrown-away one, the miracle, grew into the greatest stormflyer the planet had ever known, and dragons traveled from across the world just to fly in its shadow. Daniel Reyes stood on the ashplane one dawn, older now, watching the newest clutch of hatchlings tumble out of their shells into the red morning light. There were small ones among them, and pale ones, and here and there one whose eyes turned strange and empty and would never see. But no warrior raised an ember to test them and cast them out. Instead, the clan gathered close and welcomed each one, perfect or not, wanted just the same. High above, Sky wheeled through the bright cold air, blind and free, and Daniel tipped his head back to watch it fly. He had come to this world to watch dragons from a distance and to change nothing. He had broken every rule he was given, and in doing so he had done the one thing the whole proud history of Vaughn had never managed. He had looked at the smallest, weakest, most unwanted thing on the planet, the thing everyone else was so sure was broken. And he had seen a miracle.